everyone. My name is Kathleen Johnson. I'm your host of the Kreactivators Podcast on YouTube. And with me is Zack Yarde. He is going to be talking to us about his career and how he fell into it and his neurodivergence with being a psychologist. So, Zack, I just wanted to get a feel for how you fell into this work. Tell the people a little something about yourself. And then I think we have a pretty juicy conversation. I know I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you so much for just having me. I love having these conversations and giving clarity. And it's kind of funny how you opened it, just kind of like where I'm at professionally, just kind of falling into it, which is totally the case. And it's been a blast. So in the here and now, I'm doing a lot of awareness on LinkedIn for speaking about neurodiversity and the workplace specifically, and how to create psychologically safe and neuro-inclusive organizations, but also having conversations that are just nuanced. And I will clarify too, it's interesting that I've kind of like fallen into this because I've had a non-traditional professional journey in a lot of ways. I do have a doctorate focused on organizational change and leadership, but that's not where I started. So I'm not a psychologist, but I'm pretty close to an organizational psychologist. But my background is organizational change, not necessarily psychology at that level. But my background is in psychology and counseling, and the reason that is kind of convoluted is because I started when I went to college, my goal was to help people and work with people in direct care. And I did coaching for a long time. I studied and became a therapist and thought I was going to do that. And I fell in love with organizational change. And in my first leadership job, and when I realized that when we really are looking to optimize care, whether that's healthcare or helping professionals in for-profit or non-for-profit companies, even though my background is primarily the non-for-profit sector, if we really want to make the world a better place, we have to look at it systemically and look at it in a way where we step back a little bit and really help empower organizations and society to be more neuro inclusive and to shift some of the language we use so that we can just lead conversations that are curious and adaptable and individualized to the different individuals that we're trying to help, whether or not that is clients or our leadership or our executive stakeholders. We have to look at change at each level of that organization and just kind of society and policy level change as a whole. So that was a lot, and I can speak more there, but I knew that we had a handful of things that we wanted to dive into.
Yes, and sorry, I said psychologist. And so,
No worries.
do you refer to yourself that way?
So I would refer myself as a neurodiversity expert. So that's what I studied for my dissertation. My dissertation was called Workplace Neurodiversity Equity. And I really have, in the last several months, poured that into LinkedIn. And so it sort of became a content expert in terms of generating breakdowns, templates, and guides for how organizations, leaders, and just any of us can help facilitate change in a more intentional way that helps people feel seen, especially those that are kind of in the edges of the margins of neurodiversity.
Awesome. Yes, I first discovered you when you were talking about a term that you use that I'd never heard of. And so, how do folks frame language around this and increase their vocabulary? Because I know no one term encapsulates an experience. I'm one neurodivergent person. Would say you're neurodistinct, but would use different terminology when you're talking to a group of people because we're wanting to come across to all people as bringing them into this work. And to do that, we also have to use terms that are universally understood. So can you kind of give us the rundown on the nuances of language?
Yeah, no, there's so many nuances of language, and it is different based on context. If I'm leading a training with a big group of people or I'm doing a speaking event at a company, I typically identify myself as a neurodivergent presenter because neurodivergence, as well as neurodiversity as kind of a buzzword corporate term now, is more or less understood, like at least compared to 10 years ago, right? Like there's been a real movement to bring a conversation to these terms, and that's great. And also, you alluded to how I might use different terms depending on the room. And we've had a couple of conversations now. So, you know that I prefer as a self identifier neurodistinct. And it was a term that I heard from someone else. And I just thought, oh, that's really great because I've always struggled with identifying with the term neurodivergent, not because it's bad or wrong or anything like that, because everybody has a preference. It's not about gatekeeping language. Everybody, if they have a term that they associate with and like using as a self-identifier, then great. I think that's awesome. They should use the term that they associate with. And for me, coming from this healthcare medical model past, when I hear divergent, I hear deficit and disorder. And it's hard for me to mentally remove those words. But for a lot of people, that's not their experience. Or maybe that is their experience and that's why they prefer the term, right? There's so many different reasons why somebody might prefer one term over another. I've also heard from some people, having had lots of conversations about this at this point. Some people don't like neurodistinct. They feel like it's elitist. It's too individualized. And my response to them is, thanks for letting me know how you feel. Don't use it as a self-identifier. If they don't like it, don't use it. And I also think I tend to also like neurodynamic, because sometimes neurodistinct, I think, accidentally relates to a single type of neurodivergence, right? So like I am an ADHDer with autism, or I'm an autistic ADHDer, and I can say that. And I can say neurodistinct as being kind of like unique, but also I like neurodynamic because it honors a multifaceted perspective. Right. Because I think too, sometimes we like looking at neurodiversity as only neurodiversity, like an isolated aspect of other people. And I don't think it's that cleanly separated. I think it's really hard to remove from our other identities and our place in society and our various positionalities of power or marginalization. And we just can't simply remove the idea of our neurodistinctness away from the rest of that. So I think that term neurodynamic awakens a more integrated conversation that is using a intersectional lens. And I think that's really key. So if I'm really wanting to go in deep kind of in this conversation or in others about like talking about like nerding out about all the different types of language that might be used, then I'll just like verbally throw up all this stuff about how neurodynamic I think is really cool, because it awakens the conversation beyond neurodiversity to also include intersectionality. And I think that those two things have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's so right. And that's a great segue into talking about a very popular term that I have thought made me sound kind of cute and quirky. And you had educated me a little bit on that. And that is, I am sitting at some intersections with race and gender and all those kinds of things. Can you educate the folks on neurospicy and why you got not a talking to, I wouldn't say a chiding or anything, but
Yeah.
you got a little bit of knowledge, background knowledge on that term.
Yeah, so neurospicy is one that I hear a lot because it is kind of like, it seems cheerful. And I did a post a while ago and I highlighted how I don't use it because it sounds too cheerful. It sounds too, and I think it's good to have strength-based narratives, right? Like I think it's good to highlight and notice strengths of oneself. And that's really empowering for a lot of people. And I think that they also find a sense of community with the term neurospicy. And if that's the case, okay, use the term if you prefer it. And for me, it seems too cheerful. And for me, I have this resistance to doing anything that's too cheerful if it doesn't also look at more complex lived experiences, right? A similar example here is sometimes we talk about neurodiversity or neurodivergence as a invisible disability. But I think that sometimes that's the case and people don't feel seen a lot. And also, I can look back in my own life and look at really specific, very visible experiences where my neurodiversity was present, and it resulted in interesting situations and maybe bullying and maybe some active exclusion. And they weren't all sunshines and rainbows. So when I think of the word neurospicy, it seems too positive. So I did a post about this. I'm like, seems too positive. I'm not going to use it, to each his own. And somebody's like, well, actually, you should also be aware of if you kind of take it as a case study and break it down, you have the neuro part, but then you also have the spicy part here that has a more complex history. And it led to a really great conversation. And they highlighted to me, and I think it's partially because I'm a white male of privilege, that I never thought of this angle of neurospicy. And they highlighted to me how the term spicy has been used in a very exclusive way to be judgmental, specifically of women of color, looking at a couple different specific positionalities, but it's been used to highlight, maybe said in a joking way, an exclusionary fashion, of maybe they're just too spicy, meaning they're too flamboyant, they're too promiscuous. They're too rageful, like or hot like a pepper. And it's been used as a way to isolate and exclude and for harm. And they mentioned to me that when you just attach a neuro to it, it doesn't take away that history. And
Yeah, that's
I also, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, not to cut you, but like I was saying to you, I felt like I should have known that because I'm a woman of color and I would fall prey to the same tropes, but I was not aware. So it just highlights the learning that never ends in this space. But yeah, continue. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. And it does take constant learning, right? And that's what we have to do. We have to learn and adapt. So I think neurospicy brings community to a lot of people. It's not a term I use because on one side, I think it can be too dismissive of really hard life experiences. It's a little too rainbows and sunshine, like I said. And also it has this other side. And I think maybe I'll have less strong of a stance in the future, but I think that there's been lots of terms over the years that have been a term used to exclude, right? That has been reclaimed by the community that it's impacting as a sense of community, right? And there's a variety of words that we've seen this with. I think a common example is the word queer, right? And I think another example is the word mad, right? Where it's like, oh, that person's mad is a way to exclude. But now there's a move to a specific subcategory of that community has reclaimed it as a self-identifier. Being, again, a white straight male, I'm never going to use neurospicy because it's not my word to reclaim. So I think that's the other aspect here is maybe I'll have a less strong stance in the future, but really my stance is if you identify with it, go for it. Use that term as a self-identifier. It's not about gatekeeping words. It's more about looking at the history of the components of the words that we use because we just don't always know, right? Like, or you mentioned not knowing the term neurospicy and that like complex history. For me, when I first learned about the word neurodiversity, I had already clocked like 12 years working in the mental health field. Right. And I had worked throughout leadership. I had completed my master's focused on clinical mental health. And then I continued to work. And then I found that term and I thought, where has this been? Like I have over a decade of experience in mental health. I have literally never heard of this term. And it's because it's relatively new. And also we're constantly learning and the language is constantly evolving. So, and I think kind of to the beginning, there's just other options, right? So I think that there's options that I prefer as a self-identifier and it might change depending on the room that I'm in. I could see myself, I would probably not halt a conversation about neurospicy. Like if we're in a comment, like, like we're just trying to bring awareness to neurospicy people and I'm neurospicy. And that happens all the time. I was just watching a live stream and a white dude said, yeah, that's just a part of my neurodiversity or my neurospiciness. And I just thought that's it because it's so normalized. And that's another thing. It's like, if it brings community and a sense of connection and power, we have to be really careful about how we give a conversation. That's why this type of stuff is so important, right? Because we can just have a conversation, not trying to undercut somebody, right? Or like call somebody out in a room full of people. But it is probably something where we can pull people aside and say, hey, there's some complexities here that you might not get, which is what happened to me, luckily. Right? Somebody just pulled me aside and said, hey, there's a greater history here that you need to know before you start writing about it. And I thought, yeah, thank you. That's useful. So yeah, lots of nuance and lots of need to be curious and adapt.
Yeah, and I wonder if you had any insight on how to navigate these things when you are talking to a group of people, because just the training that I have done in the organization, we've just started educating on accessibility and have put together education that we're delivering to, big groups of people.
Yeah.
And so some of the feedback we got was, why is a facilitator using identity first language and not person first language?
Oh, nice. Yeah. I have strong feelings about this. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Great. So when you are addressing a group of people, what is your approach to those visceral reactions to certain terminology?
Yeah. Well, you're going to have it, right? Like that's going to happen. And I think we have to honor that as, because normally it's coming from a really strong place, right? Like it's normally coming from someone that as a person uses one way, like just use that person first identity first language. They're coming from a place where if they feel strong enough that they're going to highlight, hey, why are you doing it this exact way? Typically it's driven by their own values, right? Like they're speaking from their own lived experience where they've had perhaps a visceral experience themselves where they felt isolated or excluded because people refer or refuse to do not their preference, right? Or something like that. Or also I've seen it a lot where people will say like, well, my kid is divergent, or my spouse is neurodivergent, and they're actually trying to protect this close family member of theirs. And that's where I think some of that energy comes from, because it comes from their own lived experience, or them trying to essentially give care and give awareness to people that have been really close to them across time. So I think we can honor that. I think that's something we can do. We can thank them for sharing their experience, because that's the point, right? Like, so when we run into a visceral reaction of like, no, no, you got to do this other thing, we can thank it, because that highlights how nothing is straightforward, right? We have to constantly adapt, and it is super nuanced. And the example of identity first and
Yeah, could
identity
you
first
just, I'm
language.
sorry, we've gone off talking about it, but everybody might not know what we mean.
Yeah.
So can you just define that for folks?
Yeah, so the difference is how you talk about it. So I am just recently, this is something I mentioned earlier, but I think was actually unknown the first time you and I spoke, and that was I've recently received a autism diagnosis myself. So I've had ADHD for a very long time. I got the diagnosis in college, and then my parents pointed out to me that I've actually had it for much longer than that, but they just never told me. And I had that kind of like lived experience, and it was a lot of fun. And now having both a early diagnosis and an adulthood diagnosis here, it's not even necessarily about the diagnosis, but it's how we talk about it in our language. And there are some preferences by the specific type of neurodivergence, as well as context, such as who you're around. And the distinctions are: do you say, so I personally, do I say I am autistic, or do I say I am someone with autism? Do I say I am an ADHDer or somebody with ADHD? And the debate is, on one side, individuals feel like there's so many thoughts, and I'm not going to represent them all here because this is so complex. On one side, people feel like it's core to who you are. So it's not something that it's just it's who I am. I am autistic. I don't just carry, the side thing that I can set down. I don't have the ability to set my autism down and walk out the house without it. And then also the other side is sometimes like, well, yeah, but also I'm somebody with blue eyes. So like I say I have the blue eyes, I have the autism, but I don't say I'm a blue-eyed person, right? Like it's weird. And because of that, it's not as straightforward. I've dove into the research some here, and there are individuals that feel very strongly in both sides. There are some types of neurodivergence that are more one way or the other, but the more research I read, the wider that spectrum is apparent to me. A few months ago, I wanted to do a post. I want to do a very declarative post on LinkedIn to highlight, hey, is it identity first or not? What do I tell people to do? Like, what should they start with? If they're leading an all-day training, what way do they say it? And I dove back into the research, hoping to make that guide, hoping to have a declarative answer of what to start with. And by the time I got to like the seventh research article, it said basically somewhere between 30% to 80% of individuals prefer identity first language. And I thought, well, you might as well flip a coin, right? And then you have weird people like me, and I don't mean that as a way to like isolate. I actually don't mind the term weird, although that's another term that a lot of people don't like, understandably, because it's often used to isolate and exclude. But for me personally, I'm inconsistent. So depending on the room that I'm in or how I'm feeling, and especially when it's not conscious, if I'm just talking to somebody random, I will switch in between how I talk to myself. I will say I'm an ADHD, or I'll say I have ADHD, or I'll say I'm autistic or someone with autism. And I will switch back and forth within the same conversation, because for me personally, maybe I'm biased because of the research I've consumed, but also like it's also when I'm conscious, it's maybe something I'm trying to normalize that people are inconsistent, but also foundationally at the end of the day, I'm terribly inconsistent and I don't have a strong preference either way. And I think that's another group of people, right? So you have maybe strong one side, strong the other side, middle group in the middle that changes. And then also there's more nuances where we change based on context, right? So like a common example here is like sometimes somebody will say, well, I'm autistic and I can say I have autism, but you can't look at me and swaggle your finger and say they have autism. But also, I think that's problematic potentially there was like, oh, they're clearly autistic. So either way, like, does it work as a self-identifier as well as a other identifier? And that's when we get tricky. And so I think when people disclose, like, I prefer identity first language, we thank them and say, please, I'll do my best to honor that. Before I say that back to you, do you prefer identity first when you say and when I say it, or is it different? Because for a lot of people, it's also different. So I hope I clearly muddled the waters here for your question, but it
Yeah.
really is complex. And I think that when we hear a different opinion, we thank them, try our best to honor that preference, and we adapt. And now we have a good story the next time we run into somebody that's very declarative, like how I was early on.
Yeah, I totally agree with your approach. I myself use them depending on the circumstance and what makes sense. And I don't have a strong feeling either way. But I'm glad that you're setting that container for us because I never thought of it as the experience somebody else has had when certain words have been used to refer to them. And maybe that is a trauma. And so they're reacting to that. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation because I never would have thought of that. I mean, I certainly didn't have any judgment on the person that had a preference, but yeah, the emotional tie to that, I hadn't really put those two things together. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost always something behind things, right? There's a quote that I really love. I used to have it on a mug sitting at my desk when I was an early mental health professional. When I used to get cussed out all the time, it was just part of the job, not a complaint, just an observation. And I had a quote on a mug, and it was a quote from John Gottman, who is a world-renowned relationship expert. Him and his wife, John and Julie Gottman, they're great. They wrote a lot of books. People should go and read them. But I had a quote, and the quote was, "Behind every complaint is a deep personal longing." And it's always stuck with me, especially when we run into strong opinions, right? Because if somebody's courageous enough to complain, right, or object, it's normally from a place of conviction and value, right? It means that there's maybe an unmet need there. And also maybe we've buttoned up intentionally or unintentionally, we've butted up against a value, right? Because think of the adverse. We don't tend to get riled up about things unimportant to us, right? Like if somebody does something that we don't care about, we don't get super riled about it. So if we're getting super riled about it, odds are there's a deep personal longing there. There's a feeling, there's an emotion, there's a unmet need, or also there's just a value, right? When people feel like their values are being attacked or they feel like they can't protect the ones that they love, then it creates an emotional response, and it should, because we're driven to take care of ourselves, protect ourselves, and protect those that we love.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And before we come, the terms discussion just never seems to end. And I do want to move out of that territory a little
Yes,
bit. But
great.
before we do, can you tell folks about high masking versus high functioning? Because I have a son with autism and he does not like the term high functioning. And I know there's been some consternation around this in the community. And people are now saying, I am not functioning very well at all, actually. And I'm doing my best, but I'm masking. And so that's very stressful. It's very hard to do that all day when I'm around others. And I want that to be seen. So those levels of functionality. I know now we have like autism 1 and level 2 and things like that. I haven't actually had a full understanding of that. I've got to do my due diligence and do some more looking into the levels. But for employers that are trying to understand how to support employees with this, I know the describing somebody as high functioning, do you think that is an ableist point of view? And we should be actually switching to thinking about it as masking from the perspective of the person with the condition? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
This is a huge conversation. Sorry, give me a second. I'm sorting my thoughts in a way to be practical. Okay, so what I would say is I want to take a step back for a second to answer this question. And the reason is there are lots of ways we can get into specifics for autism and neurodivergence. There's lots of ways where we can talk about masking. I would say I've definitely seen a trend where the idea of saying high functioning or low functioning, especially, has changed to be either ableist or judgmental. I've seen that trend where there's been a pushback of those terms. I would also say there might be a pushback to levels too, right? And let me describe it this way. Sometimes a greater level of specificity might not help anything. And also, if I'm a supervisor, that shouldn't be my goal to learn the specific type of neurodivergence that somebody has. What my goal, I think, as a supervisor is to learn what that staff member needs. And it's not my job to know what type of autism they have. If this individual discloses to me, like, "Hey, I recently got a autism eval. I am a level 1 autism," is what I return there. It's like that's going to be interesting, but I'm not going to know even. I'm not going to have appreciation of what that means. And does the staff member even are they telling me that? So I then go home and research everything on the internet that I can find out about level 1 autism? I would guess not. Maybe that was their intent. I should ask, right? And I think that's the idea is that there are different types and there's so many different stereotypes, right? Too, like there for a long time there was this idea that everybody with autism also has giftedness, right? All of them are savants. Which is not the case. Some people that are autistic are also gifted, right? Like that is a thing that can occur, and it does. But not everybody has that idea, and I think that's also true of, and this kind of opens up positive stereotypes because you have negative stereotypes, right? Like that people with ADHD can't keep a thought straight for the life of them, right? And things like that are judgmental. But you also have positive stereotypes where because there's this association that one person with ADHD is creative, spontaneous, artistic, and going to just revolutionize your system in the most innovative way possible. That doesn't mean everybody with ADHD does. I don't identify with being like I can be creative, but I have other attributes that are more prominent when I show up at work. And so sometimes more specificity doesn't actually help anything. So if we hear a term, I'm not sure the goal should be, well, let's find a better way to add an adjective to it to go a little deeper. Unless that's the goal of that individual, whether it's a student or a staff member, I don't think that's our role. Our role as a leadership stakeholder is, okay, what does this mean for how I support you in a more individualized fashion? What do you want me to do with that information? How can I create a more psychologically safe place for you so you don't feel like masking as much, right? Like, but also masking isn't a sign that you are being dishonest. It's not a sign of you being two-faced, right? Masking is a survival mechanism when the world around you is too overwhelming because it's not built for you.
Yeah, I kind of liken it to code switching, which
Yeah.
I've kind of made
Yeah.
peace with. I know code switching has a bad connotation, like you have to pretend to or stifle your authenticity to show up a certain way in a space. But I kind of have thought of it as a positive thing. Like I know different ways to show up, and that's a part of my toolbox. And I kind of, use it as a way to relate to people or connect to people. I can slip into, if you see me around other Caribbean people, boy, can I ever be Caribbean.
Mm.
But then if I'm in a boardroom, I can speak like I'm speaking to you now. And I think that's actually an asset. So I think, just as you were saying before, a lot of these things, it's how we reclaim them or how we conceptualize them for ourselves that really matters, aside from the general way that you would apply, that term to an individual.
And I think if it awakens a conversation, right? Like, and we're learning about how to make the workplace more supportive, so we can show different parts of ourselves, then great. right? Like, I think that's the goal. Like, how do we create safe spaces where people can show up, right? And that's not a judgment of the individual, it's a judgment of the environment, right? Like, how do we optimize the space itself to be safer, where people can truly feel like they can show up? And sometimes also it has nothing to do with the environment, or at least, I don't know. I don't know if I can say nothing to do with the environment. Environments are really important. Sometimes there other factors where it goes back to that idea of us being integrated again, right? Like, that's the neurodynamic stuff. Like, yes, that environment impacts how we show up, but so does how much sleep that I got, right? Like,
Yeah.
that is a huge impact for me. Or something my wife and I talk about often is when we were dating, I was working too many hours. I was doing full time grad school, and would stim in different ways to cope with anxiety. And I didn't realize I was doing it. And I don't even have it. Normally, I have one on my desk, but I don't actually do hardly anything with paper. The little clicky pens, like the ink pens, I would click them just constantly as a way to like handle the environment. And I remember a time when she and I were dating, where she came up to me and she's like, "So you're a little stressed, Tom?" I'm constantly clicking the pen. Not even I'm like, "I'm not stressed. Why do you think that?" Like, sincerely, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. She's like, "You've been clicking that pen for the last 30 minutes." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I didn't even realize I was doing. So I had to stop buying them for a while and get my stress under control, because that's sometimes also a way that neurodivergence can be hidden, is like anxiety, and it can make things worse. And now life is just different. The context is different now. So I show up differently. Right. And it has a lot to do with, I think, support and control of an environment. So, yeah. So there's so many contextual things here we could like really dive into. I'm kind of trying to hold myself back because there's lots of interesting things we can talk about on how to
Yes, and
make
you know,
environments more safe.
we can do a part 2 and a part 3, and you know what, whenever it doesn't matter.
You're very kind.
But I certainly, yeah, and I certainly don't want to glaze over anything that anybody feels like they have to do in an environment to survive,
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
code switching
absolutely.
or masking. I certainly don't
Yeah.
want to make light of that. Ultimately, I think you and I are in the business of changing the system, so that doesn't have to be a feature. Maybe it's a bug, but it's not a feature. And so going forward in this discussion, I know people are really curious about what the future of work looks like. And I know that's changing for a lot of people. Sometimes people feel like people are being phased out in a lot of positions. And so what do you think that looks like? Because some things that I see, it looks like people are actually wanting to attract more people that are neurodistinct, or however you want to refer to it, because of the way their brain works. And because the way that their brain works corresponds with the way technology is moving. What are your thoughts on that? Like, should people be concerned? Should they feel like, yes, I actually have more of a place in this new market?
Yeah, I think the world is pretty dire right now. I think there's a lot of news about jobs decreasing and mass layoffs, right? And I do want people to feel like they have something to contribute, right? Like their uniqueness. And I think if you're listening to this and you don't know if you can take a jump for something, then I say you take a jump and do the thing. And I think that, and I believe that really honestly. And it might seem superficial, having obviously not met you or anything about that, but really take a dive and run towards a dream and an aspiration, because that's how we make the world a better place. And I think that's what we have to do. There are statistics, right, where when you look at neurodivergence, out of the global population, odds are neurodivergence is 10 to 20% of the population, if not more. It's, we're getting more access to what neurodivergence is. So that it's really spiking. Some of that's availability of diagnosing, it's the availability and access to the term. There's this curiosity on social media of just exploring what it means. And that's great. So those numbers are increasing. That being said, about 1 out of every 10 neurodivergent individuals are a part of the workforce. Said differently, roughly 90% of all neurodivergent people don't work. And that's super unfortunate. I do think that there are some strengths that neurodivergent individuals have. I mentioned earlier this idea of like, there are like positive stereotypes where we kind of get into the weeds, and where like that's not super positive to reinforce. And yeah, there is untapped potential, right? Like there is untapped potential. And a lot of the neurodivergent individuals I run into that are currently unemployed and looking for work are really excited to work and contribute, and to show up and bring their uniqueness. And I also hope that there is a trend that I've seen where human uniqueness and human messiness is starting to be valued, partially because some of the AI conversations, right? Like, I think AI does bring a lot of potential boons to accessibility, right? Like, I can't explain how much better I would have done in school had I had Grammarly, right? Like, I really can't explain. Like, had I had a tool like that, I couldn't tell you what my GPA was. It wasn't like, it was okay. Like, I had an okay GPA. It constantly improved as I got more and more tools as I got older, better ways to manage my own, executive function and systems, and ways that I learned how being an adult with neurodivergence was, right? Like, and I learned as I get older. I can't imagine what that would have been like. Had I had a spell checker that advanced, I would have been done exponentially better in high school and in undergrad. That being said, I think a lot of the AI conversations right now too, and I'm not trying to give like an anti or pro AI stance here, but some of this creative spaces, we are seeing this over rehearsed nature of AI in some capacities. And we see a reawakening of the uniqueness of the human experience. And I think that that is often highlighted in cognitive diversity, right? Like, we're seeing the boon where, like, we don't want AI, like, we want the creativity. And I hope those are the things pushed. And I hope that more that we see giving back to people that have a passion for the arts and have passion for being innovative in the workplace or being innovative within a project management role, right? Like, that's how we even went through different iterations of project management, because we tried something new. And I think neurodivergent individuals are often really good at innovation if they have a system and an environment that welcomes it. And so I think my kind of like prompt here is twofold. Yes, there's a ton of things going on, and there's pros and cons in these different aspects. But if you feel like you have a dream and an aspiration and you want to go do the thing, try it and find a community, right? Like, I think that's really key, is find a group of people that are trying to do the same thing or a similar thing, or just other entrepreneurs or other people that are working not in an entrepreneurial sense, but in an internal type gig like that. And you're just trying to find more neurodivergent individuals. There's a ton of people out there that are neurodivergent now, and there's tons of hubs and groups that are all about that peer and community support. So find community and strive, reach for that next thing. And organizations, whether you are an organizational leader or executive stakeholder, if you're neurodivergent yourself, pave the way and let people know. I think there's a lot to be said of modeling that disclosure, and I think that can be really powerful. And also, what does it look like to have pathways into leadership, to have neurodivergent representation within an organizations? I think that could be really awesome, to have specific pathways. And what do pathways look like in a linear sense, a non-traditional sense? Again, my job history was kind of all over the place because I'm somewhat non-traditional. And so, like, you have that. So what do pathways look like to develop skill sets for mastery instead, as a valid and valuable contribution to an organization? And how do we customize those and individualize them for employees? Because mathematically, not everybody can go into leadership, right? Very few organizations are set up for every single person to go into leadership, right? Like, it just doesn't happen. So what does it look like to really individualize employee support and leadership support, to support not only neurodivergence, but also individualization, employee care, supervision, and support for that entire, employment range, from like onboarding through like succession plan.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I
Yeah.
think
So that was a really long answer.
no, it was wonderful. I mean, that's why we're giving people this, this information, because I think it's something that is still a mystery, and a lot of people are just starting to unpack it. And I think the numbers of people that are neurodivergent are vastly underreported.
Yeah,
So
for
it's
sure.
probably a lot higher. And yeah, we run into it all the time in the organization. When we did a survey, it was a huge need. So I think the more information people can get regarding this, it can't be enough. So I really just wanted to thank you and for your time and the wonderful adventure we had today starting this. There was some technical difficulty, so I just wanted to thank you for your patience and sticking with us, because you have so much perspective. And if you are not following Zach on LinkedIn, I really don't know what you're doing with your life.
You're so kind.
It's amazing. Just the way that you talk about these topics and the detail you go into, I think is wonderful because the internet doesn't lend itself to a lot of nuance and critical thinking. So I just appreciate that opportunity to look at what you put out every week and just let people know where they can find you. We will have your information in the show notes, but yeah, just give folks a little bit of where they can find you.
Yeah. Oh, you're so very kind. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so honored to be here, and these are just such vital conversations. Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn. I will say right now I'm taking the month of June off of LinkedIn. I've posted daily since the beginning of the year, and a variety of templates and things. But I've decided to kind of take a month off just to refocus and refresh because I think we have to be proactive about caring for ourselves, right? And I think that that's just super, super key. I love the conversations that come out of LinkedIn. I love people commenting on things. I am often amazed. And also, please disagree with me on LinkedIn. It happens anyway, but I really get excited for people disagreeing with me. Well, disagreeing and sharing an opinion. Don't cuss me out on LinkedIn. That's a good way to get blocked. I prefer not being cussed out on LinkedIn. But other than that, I love people disagreeing with me because we have to highlight the nuance. We have to highlight how, when we're being declarative about building inclusive systems, we have to also allow for that. Well, what about this other, because we have to, because there's so many things. And I'm constantly learning. I've been studying neurodiversity for a while now. I'm connected to a lot of other neurodiversity consultants that I follow their stuff. And we are constantly learning. And so I think that if you want to learn more about neurodiversity, then you're going to find out very quickly. You have to feel like you know enough to lead a conversation with your team, right? You have to feel like you know enough to engage people when they mention it to you. Don't be afraid. There's always more to learn. It's going to feel, maybe you'll learn lots of new terms, or maybe you hear a term and you don't know how you feel about it. Great. Have a conversation about it. And also be okay being wrong. And just because somebody feels one way, it might be different for somebody else. And that's the point, right? Like that's what we want. So feel free to check me out on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I'll come back and monitor stuff more closely in July of 2026. And I have some ideas there. I'm thinking about changing some of the stuff that I do because I've realized that I want to bring in more about me. And it's hard because I've often felt in the margins of the neurodiversity space because I struggle with some of the normalized conversations about neurodiversity. And I realized that the posts where I've taken the risks, where I've said more about my own journey, have been the ones that have awoke the most authenticity and genuineness. And I don't mean that as a compliment to any strategy that I've done because it's just completely accidental and trial and error, but it is a compliment to the authenticity of other people on the internet who are willing to speak in, to give that yes and to say like, hey, use this term, you needed to know about the history, like what we talked about from some others earlier, and also are okay sharing an opinion different than somebody else. And I think that that's how we make the world a better place when we're allowed to have discussion about opinions that disagree with one another, but we're still able to plan to make the world better at the same time.
Well, that's a mic drop. I couldn't have ended it better. And thank you so much for being with us. And folks, yes, you can catch Zach on LinkedIn as he's taking a little break, but he's at it daily. So tune in, and we'll have that information, that link for you in the show notes. And Zach, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.